if you're wondering, is she really just gonna come up in here with a December, what I read that month, and pretend that it's not June? Yes. It's exactly what I'm going to do. Super aware of the fact that it's June, and then we're talking about books I read in December, but I've read a lot of books since December, and so we gotta get them out here, and I mean, we could talk about that, or we could just talk about the books, which is what I think you're here for. In the month of December, I read 11 books. I read 3,767 pages, which I would consider to be a lot. A couple months that you'll see hopefully soon if I can get it together. I have way less books than that, but December I was trying to hit my goal for the year to read 80 books, which I did. I ended up reading 84, and so these 12 were a part of that, so let's just get right into it. The first book that I read in December is How to Murder Your Life by Kat Marnell. This book is a memoir. It's written about this girl who works for a bunch of fashion magazines, and in her time during work she ends up having a pretty significant drug and alcohol problem, and so it's basically about her struggling with her sobriety and with her life kind of spiraling out of control and trying to figure out how to more or less put the pieces back together. I ended up giving this book 4 stars. It was pretty big. It's like almost 400 pages. What I liked about it is that I thought that the author was really funny. She even mentions at the back of this book just how long it took her to actually write this book, because there were some points when she just didn't really want to do it because she's just not the kind of person to really subscribe to like deadlines or things like that. So it took a while for the book to come out. The one thing that I didn't really like about it was I feel like at the end, which I won't go into too much if you want to read about it. I mean, this is a true story, but I feel like at the end I didn't really appreciate the attitude that she had regarding treatment and regarding where she is right now, just because as someone who's reading this as a therapist and someone who's reading this who does not struggle with those things, I can understand and appreciate what she says, but I don't think it sends a very good message to, like, if a younger audience was to read this book, or to somebody who was in the middle of basically trying to decide if they're going to seek treatment or not. I don't think that she really does anybody any favors with that. So if you've read it, let me know. You'll know what I'm talking about if you've read it, and let me know what you think. I picked up One Dark Throne by Kendare Blake after that. I was very excited to read this book because I loved Three Dark Crowns, and I feel like it took forever for this book to come out, even though it really didn't. So as you can guess, this is the second book in a series. I think she's actually contracted for this to be a 4-book series. Right now being June, there are 2 books out and a novella, and then there's a 3rd book I think that's supposed to come out towards the end of this year, 3 of the 4. I guess I can't really tell you too much about this if you haven't read Three Dark Crowns. Whoops. What I will say is if you were struggling reading Three Dark Crowns because it was a little slow to start or anything like that, give this book a try. If you're on the fence, give this book a try, because what I've heard from those people, myself included, is that this book is a lot more quickly paced, and you just don't have to do all the world building that we had to do in the first book, so you really get into more of Mirabella, Arsinoe, and Catherine's story. If you're unfamiliar with this series, it's about these 3 young queens who get separated whenever they're 6 years old, and then whenever they're older, they basically go through these tests and trials, and they end up having to kill each other, and the one sister who remains ends up being the queen. I gave this book 5 stars in case you were wondering. Next, I read The Merciless 3 by Danielle Vega. I don't really know why I keep reading these, other than I feel like I'm committed, I need to finish the series. But she just keeps writing them, so as far as I know, there's like 1 more out right now. Again, this has 2 books preceding it. It was a little bit better than the first 2 that I read. I think I gave this one like 3.5. It's kind of your run-of-the-mill girl ends up getting possessed, meets other girl, has some encounters with evil. There's a youth group involved. There's a boy involved. I mean, I guess my problem with her is I feel like there's not a lot of anything really special in her books. I feel like they're all pretty standard. I guess if after all of this time I still don't have anything really fantastic to say about it, then maybe that really just says it all. I also read The Language of Thorns by Leigh Bardugo. I gave this book 5 stars. My understanding of this book is that the world takes place in I think it's called the Grishna universe, and that she has written other books in this type universe, and this is kind of like a set of like stories that the children of her other worlds would be reading. I've never read anything else by her. I picked it up because I knew that it could serve as a standalone more or less, and you didn't need the context of the other books. So this is a collection of short stories. They're more Grimm's type fairy tale short stories. They're not really necessarily happy ending ones. Some of the ones in here, I think there's only one that I didn't really like. Yeah, there's a couple of different stories in here. I liked the Too Clever Fox, The Witch of Duva, When Water Sang Fire. Little Knife was pretty good too. I didn't really like The Soldier Prince. Some of them are like retellings of other stories. So The Witch of Duva is kind of like Hansel and Gretel, and When Water Sang Fire is kind of like The Little Mermaid. Oh, and Yama and the Thornwood. I forgot about that one. But it's kind of cool because you go through the pages and it builds these very beautiful illustrations as you're reading through them. And then by the time that you get to the end of the story, each story, you have like one full color illustration just at the very end. And it's just something like, I think it just adds a little something, like it's visually appealing in the book. And since I liked more of the stories than not, I ended up actually giving it 5 stars. Actually, looking back at it, there's probably a couple that I would read again. I really, really liked the last one, the one that was reminiscent of The Little Mermaid. I haven't picked up anything else by this author, but I did like the short story collection. Next, I picked up Side Effects May Vary by Julie Murphy. This is a contemporary novel. The premise of the book is Alice is 16. Alice has leukemia, and she's been told that she is going to die in a few months. So she convinces her best friend Harvey, who has a really big crush on her that she has never been willing or able to reciprocate feelings on. She convinces him to help her make this revenge list of everybody that she's going to get back and all the wrongs that she wants to right since she's going to die. And then she doesn't die, and she's more or less left to deal with the consequences of all of her actions. And she's left to deal with the consequences of what she said to Harvey regarding their relationship, and to try to figure out how to move forward. If she's not just going to be the girl with leukemia now, she's actually going to get better, what does that make her? So I gave this book 4 stars. Then I picked up The Tale of Piglet by Benjamin Hoff. This is the companion book to the Winnie the Pooh one, The Tale of Pooh, that I read a couple months ago. I really love these teeny tiny cute illustrations. Winnie the Pooh is secretly, not secretly, one of my favorite things from childhood. So this book again is a very similar to the other one. It's a philosophy book. It talks about Western meets Eastern philosophy. There are some cute little illustrations reminiscent of like the traditional Winnie the Pooh stuff. The point of it is basically that Piglet is a small little animal, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't make a difference, and that doesn't mean that his quiet type of compassion is not important. I don't know how much you'd like this book if you weren't willing to sit through some lessons in philosophy, because there's a lot of background and context regarding this, a lot of like learning about like Confucius and things like that. But if you're willing to get past that, I do think that there's something very interesting that can be learned here. Oh, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. Next on my list was Purpose for the Pain by Renee Yohe. If you have heard of this book, it's probably because you heard about it from To Write Love on Her Arms, which is a nonprofit for mental health awareness, substance use, self-harm, suicide, things like that. This book is written by a friend of one of the people who founded To Write Love on Her Arms. She was actually the inspiration for the original nonprofit, and it is a collection of her journal entries that she had from whenever she was a younger adult, and they talk about her struggles with addiction, with self-harm, with sobriety, with mental health. It's not really It's not really a story, it's not something that's plotted out, it is a collection of just journals and entries, the point of which is to understand what was going on in the mind of someone who was struggling with some pretty severe mental health problems at the time, and to see what it felt like for them whenever they started to get better. I don't know how you can really rate someone else's journal entries or somebody else's life, but I thought that it was very interesting to read, and I gave it 5 stars. Words on Bathroom Walls by Julia Walton was next. I ended up also giving this book 5 stars. This book is about a young boy who has early onset schizophrenia, and he has been in treatments, and this new drug comes out that's supposed to help mitigate his symptoms, and it works basically like magic. He ends up not really having any hallucinations or delusions, and so this is about him as the trial for this medication goes on, and it helps him get better, and then the drug slowly starts to wear off. And he is aware of the fact that this is happening, and so it's basically the first part of the book is him starting on the drug and seeing what it's like to live without his symptoms, and then the latter half of the book is them coming back and him basically trying to come to terms with what that means and what's going to happen to him. Oh, and there's also a girl that he really likes, and he's trying very hard to make sure that she does not find out that he is schizophrenic, and you can pretty much guess how well that's going to go. The thing that I did like about this book is I thought that the setup was interesting, because it is told as a series of more or less journal entries to his therapist. So the beginning of them, each chapter, it tells you what dosage of the medication he's on, it gives you the date, and then this is what he was going to say to his therapist because he refuses to talk in therapy, so these are written to the therapist. And there are also several points in here whenever she makes notes and commentary as well, regarding the things that he said in the previous chapter. So like these beginning sections here are her making commentary on what he's said before. So it's interesting because you are put in the perspective of you're reading this as he's intending for his therapist to read it, and I thought that was an interesting way to organize the book. After that, I read Little Rex by Meredith Miller. I gave this book 4 stars. It is a coming-of-age book about 3 young girls in a small town that they are desperately trying to get out of. It's set in like the early 80s or the late 70s, I believe, and all of these girls have been wronged in some way, wronged by the adults in their life or by men in their life. They've each had something pretty terrible happen to them, and this is basically their story about them fighting back, their story about them finally deciding that they have had enough and that they cannot continue to allow people to treat them that way. I like this because it's kind of gritty. It was kind of edgy. These girls aren't necessarily the most moral or likable characters, but it's not really about that. It's about burning the people who burn you and what happens whenever a young adult has finally had enough of the way that they have been treated. The little inscription on the back of the book says they can't tell whether things are finally beginning to happen or we're all just falling apart and starting to go a little crazy. These girls can't save each other. They may not be able to even save themselves, but they're going to tell the truth about what it's like to be 3 girls on the cusp of adulthood and all the shocking realizations that come under the guise of growing up. Got a match? We're almost done. After that, I read Let It Snow, which is 3 holiday romances. It is by John Green, Maureen Johnson, and Lauren Myracle. I think it's Myracle. I read this book because it was Christmas time at the time, and I just wanted a cute, fluffy, contemporary. This is 3 short stories that are actually all woven together. I didn't know that they ended up being stories that would overlap, but they did. They are also set in the Christmas season. There was a Waffle House involved, which is kind of cool. I had never read anything by the 2 authors whom are not John Green on here, but I actually had to look up which chapter was written by John Green because all of these authors, at least their styles, it transitioned pretty seamlessly throughout the 3 short stories. So that's, something to its credit, the fact that it was woven really well together. Yeah, what I can tell you is that there's some teenagers, there's some cute holiday romance, there's a teacup pig, there is a Waffle House, and there is a giant snowstorm, and yeah. I don't know if it's something that you'd really want to read right now, considering that, again, it is June, but maybe put it back on your list for, you know, whenever we get some of that cooler weather. The last thing that I read in December was A List of Cages by Robin Rowe. I love this book. I gave this book 5 stars. I felt like I was pretty much the last person on earth to read this book, but if you're watching this right now and you still haven't read this book, then you're probably the last person in the world to not read it. You know what? And most people that I have seen who have read this book have also really liked it. This is a story about Adam and Julian. They are 2 teenage boys who at one point were in foster care together, and then Adam got adopted out and he hasn't seen Julian in like at least 5 years. And then one day, Julian just shows up as a freshman at a new high school and Adam is a senior there, and it's about the 2 of them trying to rekindle their relationship as brothers, their friendship. It's Adam trying to figure out, you know, what has happened to Julian. Has anything, you know, what has his time been like since he was still in foster care? How are their lives drastically different right now? And I will say that this book, there is a lot of trauma and there is some abuse. There is some like physical and sexual abuse talked about in this book, so if that is something that you are sensitive to, you should know that going in. But this was definitely one of those books that made me cry. I read it in about 2 days flat and I loved it. So that's everything that I read in December. That was a lot of books. If you are still here, I appreciate it. If you are choosing not to make fun of me for making this video in June, I appreciate it. And if you are wondering, is she going to just film her January books that she read right now and keep on the same shirt and hope that we don't notice? That's a very good possibility. Bye.